whole set. Piss on you. I'm working for Mel Brooks. Not in the face. Leave us alone, Mel Brooks!
And welcome back to the Supercast. You know who I am. I'm Steve Z, the man who put the Z in Supercast.
And I'm the Super Foch, the man who put the Super in Supercast.
How's it going, man?
Dude, it's going pretty well. How about you, sir?
Pretty awesome. I mean,
yeah.
I would say I'm kind of tired just because I'm staying up late watching shows and everything.
Right.
But I'm super excited about this topic because it's something that we've talked about off and on. Mm-hmm. We actually had a few unofficial episodes about this individual.
Yep.
And we're talking about Mel Brooks.
The legend himself.
He's the man, the myth, the comedic mastermind behind several things.
Yeah.
Here we go. We're going to be talking about Mel Brooks, and really it's our top 5 favorite Mel Brooks films.
Yes. And here's the thing, guys. As Steve and I have talked actually off air, all these films could be in any order if we really were being honest, because his films are just classic. They're all really good. But we wanted to have our own definitive list because we thought, that's just what people like. And so that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's good clickbait, and people like lists. They like to get angry. It's
Yes.
like, what did you put that on for? That should be at least 2. They like to get angry and all that. And as you were saying, like, his movies are so classic that really the top 3 or 4 could be in anybody's top 10 of any comedies of all time.
But before we get into the list, we do want to kind of, warm ourselves up a little bit and just kind of talk about our experience with Mel Brooks. Now, I believe I can pinpoint when my experience began, but I'm gonna ask you first. When do you remember being conscious of Mr. Brooks?
Now, I wouldn't say it's conscious. My first experience with Mel Brooks was when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And we went to this old video store that definitely doesn't exist anymore. It predates Video Express, if you can imagine that.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So we went there, and I saw this interesting looking movie that had these 2 faces on it. And one was this guy with like his hair all crazy and everything. Turns out that was Young Frankenstein. So I took that movie to my mom, and she's like, "Oh, that movie's great." And I checked it out, and yeah, I didn't get it totally, but I remember there was like 2 or 3 parts that I really liked.
Yeah.
And I ended up buying that movie later on, and I became a Mel Brooks fan from henceforth.
Oh, that's awesome. I got a funny story that doesn't even involve me, but it does involve people I'm related to. You see, when my parents were dating, Blazing Saddles came out. So one of their first dates they ever went on was to see that movie. So it's kind of like Mel Brooks has just been with me my whole life, even beforehand. But for me, my memory of Mel Brooks starts actually with you. I believe that you brought over a cassette version of Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Yeah.
And I believe it was at my house back then. And I just love that film. I thought that was just so funny. And there's some obvious, adult humor that flew over my head. But still, I thought it was hilarious. So that's pretty much how I got started with this awesome genius of comedy, as we'll call him.
Yeah, and he works on so many different levels. Doesn't matter what age you are. There's jokes that click for like 5 to 10-year-olds. Yep. I mean, there's some fart jokes in there. There's some random just potty humor, but there's also some very sophisticated humor, some satire even. So that's what makes his movies so much rewatchable and makes them classics and also endlessly quotable. And Mel Brooks is a big part of my life. I always bring him up, especially when you and I used to hang out a lot. We always quoting the producers or Blazing Saddles, something like that. My dad and I, growing up, we always quoted Young Frankenstein. So definitely got a lot of experience with this guy. And what got us thinking about this topic actually was the man just turned 96.
Whew. 96 years young. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and he's amazing. He's still pretty active, probably making some musicals right now.
He's made a few in the past.
Enjoying the good life. Hasn't directed a film since Dracula Dead and 11 way back in the day. But he's still been active, still doing stuff, and he's just a great man. So we're going to talk about him.
And if my wife hears this, she's going to kill me if I don't mention the 2,000-year-old man. If you guys don't know what that is, it's him and his buddy, Sid Caesar, doing the 2,000-year-old man. And it's hilarious. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, just look it up on YouTube. It's there. Do yourself a favor. It's really funny. My wife, introduced me to that. I hadn't seen it before. And then another side thing is on the Disney Plus app. They have this Forky Ask a Question show, and it's a spinoff of the Toy Story toys and everything. And he asks about different subjects every episode. Well, one of them is love. He's like, "What's love?" And all these toys are kind of telling him, and they're voiced by not only Mel Brooks, but who plays Maleficent Brooks, by the way. But he is joined by Carl Reiner, who is a rhinoceros, and Carol Burnett, who plays a plastic chair, like you had when you were a little kid, you know. And who's the other one? I can't remember, but it's on there. If you look up Forky Asks a Question on the Disney Plus app, just click on the Love episode, and Mr. Mel Brooks is there with all his buddies. It's really funny.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool that you bring up Carl Reiner and Sid Caesar here, because that's kind of how Mel Brooks got his start, was just working with those guys. I think one of his first major breaks was writing for the great show Get Smart.
Yep.
And he's pretty awesome. We're going to get into his films, though. We got our personal countdowns, and we're not going to get into each film too much. We're just going to talk about why we think this one in particular is should be of note. And for me, I didn't ask you to do this, but I have a few honorable mentions.
Sure, go ahead.
One of you mentioned right off the bat. We were talking about Robin Hood Men in Tights. I just love this movie. It's very funny. It's my honorable mention, along with another one from the 90s, and that's Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Yeah, definitely. I thought about those movies after you and I had talked about our list the other day. I thought about those movies, and while I do love both of those films, I didn't figure they quite fit in a top 5 list. They're close. They're very, very close, but I just couldn't see myself putting those movies ahead of the movies that we actually have in the list. So it's not a slam on Mr. Brooks or anything like that. It's just our personal opinion.
Yeah. And just one of the big notes is that Mel Brooks was a visionary. He realized that Mr. Dave Chappelle was going to be awesome in the future. He cast this guy early on as Achu. And he was awesome in it. So I love that film. Not just for Achu, but for various other things that he does in that film. But I'm with you. Those are great, but they're just... These others are just slightly better.
A little bit.
All right, so starting off with number 5, and for mine, I really racked my brain about this, because it wasn't just those two. It was probably History of the World. It was a few others that I was thinking about. Yeah. But I eventually landed on one it's a little different. Okay. And that's Silent Movie. And it's starring Mel Brooks himself, along with Don DeLuise. Right. And, of course, Marty Feldman. And this movie is a silent film in color, but it's about Mel, the filmmaker, trying to make a silent movie in the 1970s with all these great actors such as James Caan, Burt Reynolds, and so forth. Right. And it's just a lot of slapstick humor, and it's just kind of a good time. I don't know what drew me to this film, but I watched it on AMC for the first time, and I like this one a lot, and that's what really got me into the sort of the deep cuts of Mel Brooks' filmography. Okay, I don't have much experience with silent movie. I don't think I've actually watched it, but you've definitely made me intrigued about it because I've heard some good things about it. So definitely need to check that out. Yeah, it's got a lot of comedy legends in there too. Sid Caesar comes out again, and I like it just because it's very meta movie. It's Mel Brooks making a movie, starring Mel Brooks making a movie, right? That's silent, and it's just really funny. And he thought it was really great because he could cast all these famous actors and pay them next to nothing because they weren't really actually learning lines. They were just there for a day doing some pantomiming, and that was it. So he had his star-studded cast, and even though it's a very low-budget film. So it's worth checking out if you haven't ever seen it. What about your number 5?
Alright, so my number 5 is, again, the movie that started it all for me when it comes to Mel Brooks, and that's Men in Tights. It's still a hilarious movie, and there's a lot of quotable lines, but just looking back on it, I really feel like it's definitely not his worst movie or anything like that, but I just feel like the other movies are a little bit better. So, but I still love this film. I love, the casting is really, really great, and it's just got a lot of quotable lines in it, as most of his films do. But it's definitely one that, if you like comedy and you're a fan of Cary Elwes, he's in this movie too. So there's that. But yeah, it's a good film. But I'm gonna keep that one at number 5.
I'm glad you mentioned him. He's. I love the shot they give. The big film that they're really spoofing is Robin Hood not Men in Tights. Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, which came out a few years prior, and it was a major hit. It's like the number 2 ranking movie in 1991, and they kind of throw a shot at him. It's like, hey, Kevin Costner can't even speak with an English accent, but guess what? Cary Elwes can.
Yes,
and he's so dapper, and he even gets to sing in this one, so pretty awesome. I agree with you. It's a tour de force film. I agree with you though, but the comedy is a little more lower scale. I'm not going to say it's elementary. A lot of sight gags and things like that.
Yeah.
It's a little more crude than the others on the list. A lot of innuendos and things like that, and just a lot of silliness too, like the witch is called Latrine and all that. So,
I mean, it's still quotable lines and everything, and like I said, I mean, you could ask me tomorrow, and this movie might be up a little higher in the list. You never know. But just for argument's sake tonight, while we're doing the show, I'm going to put that at number 5.
For me, number 4, it's a 1980s Mel Brooks film, and it's a spoof film. He's big into spoofs, and this one is a spoof on Star Wars, and that is Spaceballs. So, what I like about it is the cast. I love Mel Brooks, obviously, as the President Scrooge, Rick Moranis as Dark Helmet, and of course you have Barf in there, played by John Candy, and Bill Pullman playing Lone Star, who's kind of like this combination between Indiana Jones and Han Solo, and it's just great. I love it. It's got a lot of set pieces that are really funny, a lot of gags. It's not the classic sophisticated humor that you see in some of the ones that are in my top 3, but it's still a very funny movie.
It's funny because I heard a story where Mel Brooks actually asked George Lucas if he could actually do it, and he pretty much gave him his blessing. It was like, don't rip me off too much or something like that, I think I heard, but he actually really thought it was funny, so I was glad to see that.
Yeah, and it's the first film I remember watching that really breaks the fourth wall.
Right, yeah.
Because you have a part in the film where they sit there and they watch Spaceballs, the movie, in order to find out where the protagonists are hiding. Right. So they fast forward and all that stuff. But also, Spaceball merchandise is featured throughout. It's sort of like a commentary on what happened with Star Wars. So
right.
It's very much worth your time. It spoofs not only Star Wars, but also, I guess it's got a little Godfather in there with Pizza the Hut playing sort of like that, but also alien scene in there. And, of course, the finale has a Planet of the Apes sort of send-off. Very good, very funny, and it's one of those that's endlessly quotable. I mean, how often do you think about ludicrous speed or prepare to fast forward?
Yep.
I mean, granted, we don't fast forward anymore, but back in the day when you had a VCR, that was a quote that always came up.
Yeah.
Prepare ship for light speed. No, light speed is too slow. Light speed too slow? Yes, we're gonna have to go right to ludicrous speed.
At number 4 is a movie that I thought was funny when I first saw it, but it just keeps getting funnier the more I see it, and that's Young Frankenstein.
Okay.
This film is, I debated on putting it higher. This is how hard this list was for me. I don't know if you dealt with this, but it was like, I don't know if I should do it or not. So I kept it at number 4, and you'll understand why. At least you'll understand my reasoning why in a minute. But this movie still is just chock full of great performances, chock full of great lines, and come on, Puttin on the Ritz. I love that scene. That's classic. So again, this is just movie. It just ticks all the boxes for me.
Yeah, I'll save all my commentary on this one for later because obviously, if you haven't figured it out yet, it's in my top 2.
I think so.
So I'll save all my stuff.
All right. So what's next on your list, man?
All right, number 3 for me, The Producers. So this was the one that I really debated because this one could be number 1, it could be number 2, or it could be number 3. And I eventually put it at number 3. And here's the pluses, the pros.
Sure.
And that's mainly what I center on because there's not many cons for this one.
Right.
But I really love the dynamic between Gene Wilder and Zero Mostel. I think they're a great duo. Love the script. Love the premise. 2 guys putting on a play that's supposed to be a flop, Springtime for Hitler, and it's just a great fun ride. So many fun moments in it. I love the characters, especially Kenneth Mars as the playwright. It's really funny premise in it. It kind of sets the standard for what we see now with like things like Inglourious Basterds or Jojo Rabbit or something like that. I mean, it all started with the producers making fun of Hitler. I'm pretty sure that was very groundbreaking for the 60s.
I mean, you got to think that you have something like that where the whole play is about Hitler, and it's essentially written by a Jewish guy, and it's one of those films, and I'm not going to say too much right now because it is on my list as well, and I want to keep some comments, but I agree with you, man. Just a classic comedy film, and one that if you haven't seen this movie, you have to see this movie. That's just no two ways about it.
Well, here's to failure.
To failure. Oh, thank you. It's very kind of you.
All right, well, moving on. A movie we just talked about here a few minutes ago, Spaceballs. It, of course, was... it's also another one of his movies that got funnier the more I watched it, too. And I just love the cast. Of course, the late great John Candy. I love Barf. He's great. But everybody in this movie is hilarious. Can't really say anything bad about it. It's just a really good movie. I don't think you have to be a fan necessarily of Star Wars or science fiction per se, because I still think you can get a lot of comedy and a lot of things out of this film. But it's great parody, and I love it. Like I said, the more I watch it, the more I love it. So there you go.
Yeah, I guess it's the transitional period for Mel Brooks where he just gets silly.
Right.
I mean, you have like Mega Maid, this giant spaceship turns into a maid with a vacuum cleaner to steal the air, things like that. It's just very silly. I mean, that's why I guess when you're at elementary school, you just love it. And I guess it gets better over time, especially the scene where Dark Helmet's playing with his dolls.
Of course, I think the funniest scene is the when he's talking about what you're seeing is now.
Oh yeah, that's
the
what
now.
I'm saying.
The now thing. That's my favorite part, I think.
So I'm saying it blew my mind. I was like, I've never seen a movie that acknowledges that it's a movie while you're watching it, and it even has a scene where he goes to check out Spaceballs out of their little video store, and you see all the Mel Brooks movies lined up there before you get to it. So, pretty awesome.
So you're number 2, sir.
Right, number 2 for me is a very controversial film, as in, I don't think this movie could be made now, but I think it's probably his most powerful film as far as what it's trying to do, because it is satire at its best. Yeah. And that's Blazing Saddles.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Blazing Saddles, not only is it funny, but the social commentary and just what it was doing, casting a black man in the lead, and he's the smartest guy in the movie by far. which is thrown in the face of all those Western movies that would always cast these black actors as just like, we're going to just blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Uncle Tom characters or something like that. And this movie just turns it on the head and just takes all those racist things and just throws them out the window and just we were talking about the producers. It really does a lot for making you think about this dark period of our history, and I just love it just for that, but also because it's really funny. It's on so many different levels. It's funny,
right?
I mean, it has your Looney Tune humor, literally with Telegram from Mongo, and which the great Richard Pryor contributed a lot in those scenes,
definitely,
and all the way up until like the more sophisticated stuff. So it's all over the place. Great cast.
Well, I'll say the suspense and say this is also my number 2. So we agree on this. I mean, it's a film that I don't know. It's just it came so close to being my number 1. It really did. This number 2 and number 1 could really interchange depending on the day. I mean, I know I said that about the other films too, but it's no truer than these 2 spots right here, because I think that this film specifically, I think Cleavon Little makes this film.
Yeah.
And what I mean is, anybody less than Cleavon would have made this movie horrible.
Yeah.
Or nearly not as good. Maybe not horrible, but nearly not as good. I think Cleavon Little just has this aura about him where, like, you can just tell he's the smartest guy. And it's not like an arrogant thing, I don't think, or, I'm better than you kind of thing. It's just, he just is. You know what I mean? So, I just love the way he handles himself throughout this film, and obviously has some funny lines. I think this is one of my favorite Gene Wilder performances. I think he's really good in this film.
Yeah.
And I think the chemistry between him and Cleavon is just amazing, and I love it. It came very, very close to being number 1 for all of those reasons.
Yeah, me too, and that's exactly what I was going to think about, is that duo there, those 2 guys working off each other. The scene where, I mean, just the introduction for Cleavon. It's like, are we awake? I mean, if you've seen the film, you know what happens next.
You know what the next line. We won't say them.
Playing chess.
Let's play chess.
Yeah, it's just so great, and of course, can't forget Mr. Hedley Lamar himself.
Oh my gosh,
Harvey Korman playing a great villain.
I love that character. The more I watch it, like he gets funnier and funnier, and I mean, everybody's great in this film. I mean, not to fanboy too much, but everybody's just on their A game throughout this film, completely.
Definitely.
Quietly into the realm of genius. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, Damen und Herren, from what was once an inarticulate mass of lifeless tissues, may I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
All right, number 1s.
All right, man, go ahead. You're number 1.
All right, so my number 1 is your number 4, and that is Young Frankenstein. And I'm not saying it because it's my first Mel Brooks film. I'm saying it because I think it is the most sophisticated. I think it's the one that hits the most tones as far as being a spoof of something. If you sit down and watch the old Frankenstein movies, and then you watch this one, you're like, oh my gosh, it is pin perfect. But also I think it's the most intelligent of the ones. I think the jokes, you actually have to, I mean, for most of them, you have to think a little bit harder. There are obviously ones that I found funny when I was like 5 and 6 years old, such as, you haven't even touched your food yet. And then you just... But I just really like this one a lot. I think it's the performances, the biggest thing. Gene Wilder, he's a genius. He helped write the script, and I think that's what makes it work really well. Is Mel Brooks kind of took a back seat to Gene Wilder in this one.
Yep.
He just okay, I'll just help write it a little bit and direct. So I think that helps out the film a lot. But also, Marty Feldman is just insane.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
In this one, but also Madeline Kahn. I think it says this one and Blazing Saddles are her 2 best performances.
Without a doubt. I mean, if I watched Young Frankenstein right now, it'd probably be number 1 just because it's that great. I mean, this movie is hilarious and it's shot really well. I mean, it's a black and white film, which I think was a daring thing for him at that time.
Yeah.
To put the whole film in black and white. But honestly, I would never want to see a color version of this film. I think it would probably not ruin it necessarily, but bring it down a lot, because I really think the black and white really just makes it that so much better.
I agree, and there's actually some footage of the color version, and it just looks terrible. And
I'm sure.
Peter Boyle as the monster, he just looks even sillier, but in black and white, it just works so well.
Yep. I mean, I probably spent a year thinking this was probably my favorite Mel Brooks movie, just because I watched it after so many years of not watching it, and I watched it again, and I just fell in love with this film all over again. And so it's just one of those things where so many great things, and a lot of the movies are like that. So many great things came together, and maybe shouldn't have worked or whatever, but just awesomely, just come together so perfectly. And that's all down to, I think, the genius of Mel Brooks, as we've said a couple times already.
Yeah, and probably should say the top 2 or 3 of these we'll probably just make our own individual episodes out of later on. So if you want to hear us talk deeper about these, we'll definitely come back to them, because I'm just talking about them right here. This kind of whets my appetite for it. So your number 1, I think I know what it is.
Okay, so my number 1, like I said, it could have easily been Young Frankenstein, but I wanted to pick the movie that I really identified with the most, and that is, of course, The Producers. I've been on stage, I've performed all my life, and so, and I've been in musicals, as you can attest to. So, I mean, this film just hits so many great notes for me, and I love, though my favorite part will always be Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder. I mean, they are just so good together, and I could have watched a 4-hour version of that movie, or whatever, just because of them 2 guys. I mean, it's just amazing. And as you mentioned with your review, I mean, this is a pretty bold leap, even for that time period, for Mel Brooks to do, to talk about a show all about Hitler. And of course, they making fun of him, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's not held in a great light or anything like that. But it's just, it's such a funny performance by that guy. I mean, I can't think of his name that played LSD.
Dick Shawn is LSD.
Yeah, I mean,
who plays Hitler. That's what. So when I first watched this film, I remember watching it on TV, and the first 15-20 minutes, it drew me in, just seeing Gene Wilder and Zero Mostel together. But then what really sold me was the Love Power little song. And I was like, I have to go buy this movie right now. The Producers is like it initially. It just jumped to my top of my list.
I couldn't believe what they were talking about. I was like, people let him make this? I mean, people let him, release this? I mean, I know it's a parody and they're spoofing Hitler, and it's not, but it's just, it was so outrageous to me at that point in time. And it got funnier the more I saw it. And it's my favorite film. I mean, I just think it's so funny and made so well, as all of his films are. So good. So yeah, that's definitely my top 1.
I can't argue with you too much. I mean, like we were saying, the top 2 or 3 are basically interchangeable.
It's just one of the things. Like, if you watch a Mel Brooks movie, you just you leave it just feeling so happy. And you feel like, and that's the joy that you have with these films. I mean, they're just all funny and some really, really, really awesome performances by some of the greatest actors that Mel Brooks was able to, put together. I mean, I think that's a brilliant thing on his part, to put not only talented people, but people that work well together. Like Gene Wilder and Cleavon Little, as we said, and then Gene Wilder and Zero Mostel. I mean, it's just, I think that's what makes these movies so great, is the chemistry between the 2 characters.
Definitely. And the man was a genius. I guess he still is. But these films are classics, and you haven't seen any of them, or you want to check them out again, highly recommend it.
Please do.
Because his movies rank among the best comedies ever made, and definitely are worth your time. You're having a bad day, or you just need a good laugh. Put them in, and I guarantee you, in the first 5 to 10 minutes, you will be saying, "Oh my gosh, this is so funny," and you will just lose it, and you'll love it. So please go do that.
Yeah, I mean, we honor the man, and one day we'll be without him, but maybe not completely, because his movies will live on years and years from now. I really feel like in 100 years they'll still be watching Mel Brooks films and loving them as much as we do, because they're that good, folks. They're just that entertaining.
I agree. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is to scour YouTube and find people reacting to these films that have never seen them before, and it's just awesome. It's seeing people see the black sheriff get introduced into Rockridge, and they're just like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe they did this in a movie." Same thing with the Springtime for Hitler stuff. It's just amazing that this man could get this done, and he pushed the envelope. And I think that's a big thing that we've lost in comedy.
Right.
I think we've just kind of gotten stale. We don't really try to challenge things, and maybe we need another Mel Brooks to come along and kick some people in the pants.
Now, there was a film that we haven't talked about that was on either of our list, but I want to ask you about this because I remember you showed me this movie, High Anxiety, 2 years ago, and it's also made by Mel Brooks, but I remember I didn't like it as much as the ones that are on the list. What's your quick review of that film?
So High Anxiety, I like the Hitchcock stuff it does as far as like paying homage to that. I don't know what doesn't work about this one as much. It has you have Harvey Korman coming back again. You have Cloris Leachman. You have a good cast and everything. But I don't know. It has its moments in it, I would say. But as a film, it doesn't hold up as well as the others. It's got some pretty good jokes in there. And I like when it actually is trying to really rip off Hitchcock and have like some Hitchcock shots and everything. Right. So if you're a Hitchcock fan, you're going to find it funny. But it doesn't say as much as the others, and I guess as Mel Brooks, maybe as an actor, kind of brings it down a little bit for me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there were some funny scenes. I mean, I didn't hate the film or anything like that, but I just, like those others, I don't remember a specific scene that just stuck in my head, Like, I could watch that movie right now, and it'd be like I never watched it before, because I couldn't tell you a single scene from any of that. I remember watching it with you, and I laughed a few times, but it was just, to me, it wasn't on the level of the movies that we talked about earlier. So
it's not, and there's a few of his that reach that level for me. Like, for me, it's the 12 Chairs. I watched it, I gave it a good try, and I'm like, this is good, but it's just not that great. Right. So, don't want to end it on that. Let's just end it on glowing reviews. This man is awesome. He made some great films, and also hit it on Broadway pretty recently. So
good. So happy birthday, Mel Brooks, if you're listening, which I'm pretty sure you won't, but hey, you never know. But happy birthday anyway. We love you, and we will celebrate your awesome films forever.
Do the defendants have anything to say in their behalf before the court pronounces?
This is a wonderful man. He made me what I am today. He did. And what of the dear ladies? What would their lives have been without Max Bialystock? Max Bialystock, who made them feel young and attractive and wanted again. That's all I have to say.
So, in our next episode, man, what do we got coming up for the fine folks of the Supercast?
Well, we just recently talked about Superman, and now we're going to talk about another man. He's a Spider-Man, and it's a film that I know you've seen, and I've just been kind of lazy, but also a little cheap. I didn't want to go see it at the theater, and I didn't want to shell out too much money for it, but I'm going to watch Spider-Man No Way Home which is the most recent Spider-Man film.
Yeah.
I already know some spoilers from it. I know the other Spider-Men show up. I mean, if you just have internet connection, you know that.
Couldn't run away from that, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I'm interested in checking it out. I'm interested to see how they finish up this particular arc with Peter Parker and seeing the old people come back. But really, I'm interested in seeing what they do with the villains.
Well, I'll definitely save my opinion until the show because, like he says, I have seen the film and I'll save my opinion for the show. Let's just put it that way. And really look forward to talking about that film and seeing how you liked it. Check it out when it comes out, guys. And thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to hear more, we are on Spotify. Just look up Supercast with a Z. And we're also on social media. On Facebook, just look up in the Facebook groups Supercast with a Z. And on Twitter. And we also have a YouTube channel for Supercast. So a lot of ways to join us and give us your top 5 of Mel Brooks or whatever, whatever you want to talk about. If you have any suggestions for future shows, we definitely welcome the help. But really enjoyed this episode and talking about one of our favorite people in Mel Brooks. And looking forward to the next episode where we talk about Spider-Man. So until then, for my partner, the Stevesy, I am the Super Foch, and we'll see you next time on the Supercast.